Welcome to Big Hearted Indy, the Citizen 7 podcast about genuine friendship, big-hearted service, and forming whole leaders in Indianapolis. Join your hosts Greg Enos, Don Palmer, and Chris Spangle every episode as they sit down with men who are building, mentoring, serving, and leading across our city. If you want deeper friendships, a clearer sense of purpose, and practical examples of leadership shaped by service, you're in the right place. Today we are talking to Peter Greer and Scott Pothoven. Scott is here in studios with us, and Peter Greer is on Zoom. And we're going to turn to Don today to set up our conversation. Tell us a little bit about Peter and Scott.
Well, I'm going to let them do that. But in terms of this topic of too busy for purpose, we came to this because I've always felt that. Having been a retail automobile dealer and always felt like I was putting 10 pounds of sugar in a 5-pound bag when it came to my schedule and things to do and trying to work more on what not to do than what to do. So that's, and from a disclaimer, for me, a trip to see microfinance in the Dominican Republic totally changed my life when I was in my mid-30s. And so that's one of the reasons why we're talking about this. And it's something that I struggle with because I am really a creature of comfort. I live in a comfortable home. I have a comfortable car. Just life is pretty comfortable. And it's sometimes hard to get outside your comfort zone. And I need guys like Greg and Scott and Peter to give me a little punch in the side and say, hey, partner, kind of think about doing something different. So let's hear from Scott. You're a Iowa farm boy. Just tell us a little about your upbringing, kind of family you came from, and just a little about kind of some of the steps in your career.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Greg, honor to be on the show today. So thank you very much for the invitation. So I grew up on a farm in Iowa, central Iowa, Pella area. If you're familiar with Pella Windows, or maybe Vermeer is another big manufacturer there. So a couple great businesses and a thriving town. But grew up on a farm. Didn't appreciate it as a young boy having to go out to work, but now I look back and really appreciate that upbringing and just some of the values that it taught me. Went to a small Christian college up in Chicago, and then worked in Chicagoland for about 20 years or so. Was in Chicagoland. Got into financial planning and investing right out of college. Did that for 15 years. And this may come out a little bit more throughout the conversation, but just felt the Lord tugging on my heart. Had a really good friend. Owned a manufacturing plant and really started to have a vision for business as mission and using the business as a way to share the gospel with people. And part of that led to wanting to do some sustainable business in Africa. And so in 2010, 2011, I transitioned out of the financial services world and went and did some of this work in Africa. Didn't move to Africa. We would go back and forth a couple times throughout the year, but really with a heart, again, of creating sustainable jobs and then sharing the gospel. We learned what anybody who has done business internationally learns, and that it's not easy. And I think we had some real relational impact over that time, but over the course of time, the business opportunities just struggled. And ultimately, we decided the Lord was leading in a different direction. In the meantime, I'd met my wife, Jenny. That is what brought me down to Indianapolis. And so that was about 12 years ago. And then 8 years ago, I went back into financial services with Blue Trust, Ronald Blue at the time. Mm-hmm. Many people may be familiar with it, and just, blessed and just love the work that I get to do serving clients now.
So let's go back to your upbringing. You say, you value being on the farm. How do you think you're a different person because you grew up that way? And most of the people listening may be in a suburban setting or an urban setting. And how could they substitute that, or how could they make over what that brought to you?
Yeah, great question. I think it takes a lot of intentionality if we're in an urban, setting. But even so, one of the things, you may have heard this too. If you work with your hands, you rest with your mind. If you work with your mind, you rest with your hands. And that's one of the things. Like growing up on a farm, so I work with my mind. for the most part.
Yeah.
And so just even getting out and mowing the grass
Yeah.
in my house, right? I haven't got my wife convinced to put a garden in yet, but I just a little
Yeah.
garden, just some of those things. I think that's part of it is just getting, God put man in the garden, right? He put Adam in the garden. And there's something about just getting in the garden, getting our hands dirty that feels good for the most part. So
Yeah.
I think we can find ways to do it if we're
Uh-huh.
intentional. Yeah.
Did your wife come from a similar rural background?
No, she didn't. She didn't. Her dad was a pastor.
Okay.
So we were actually just home in Iowa this past weekend, and she still sometimes, long story, but anyhow, she's still learning farm jargon. Let's put it that way. So, yeah.
But
great.
briefly, what compelled you to leave the farm?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, some young men might hang around and take care of the family.
Totally. I would say, and this is a little bit more of my personal, but my dad was the oldest of 8 siblings, grew up in a different generation. My dad's 85. He grew up on the farm where I think my dad would tell you he didn't have a choice. He had to farm. Like his dad, he was the oldest. He had to help, just help the family. And so when I was a kid, my dad was really intentional about saying, you go do what you want to do.
So good.
And almost pushed me away from it a little bit. And farming was hard in the 80s and early 90s. It's changed a lot. But he wanted me to go be who God had created me to be, and that was one other thing, when I think back to the farm too, like, how do you recreate one of the things I appreciate most, when I was back this weekend, saw my uncle who my dad farmed with, his brother, and like working hand to hand. You guys know this through the years, right? The relationship you get when you're doing something alongside another guy, and I had the pleasure of doing that with my dad and my uncles, and I didn't know it at the time, but oh, that's so meaningful. So just working with other people just creates an instant connection.
That's precious. That's Citizen 7. We're seeking to be on mission together.
Exactly, right?
So
it's
glad.
Community, and we all desperately need it, So I was blessed to have it. Sorry.
Yeah. It was one of the things that kind of brought Greg and I together is said, whatever we do, we're not going to do it alone.
Yeah.
Okay, we might go try to save the world, but it's going to be a dual effort, not a solo effort.
Amen.
So let's hear from Peter Greer. Peter has been a longtime friend. We both love microfinance, and I'm a big a fan of Peter's. He's written several books, one of which was recently on prayer that really spoke to me. But Peter, tell us who you are, where you came from, and a little how you got to this place.
Well, no one who is in the room, I wish I was right there with you.
Spot here for you.
Well, there we go. But I am living in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but grew up in Massachusetts. And my father was a pastor. My mom very active in ministry and also in the public school system. And when I think about the kind of moments that matter, Don, to answer your question, I think about 3 of them. And the first is just that moment of matter where my parents taught and lived out what it looks like to follow Jesus in a real, not perfect, but in a real way. And that got into me as well. So I'd say that gift that I had of having parents that taught and lived out what it looks like to follow Jesus. Second moment that matters is when I was studying in Russia and heard about microfinance for the first time. And Don, I know we have that in common, but I still remember it. The first time that I heard about people using tools of finance to unlock the capacity that God has given all of us and doing it to break the cycle of poverty, and then the imagination of, and what would happen if we could do it with the church at the center as reaching out into communities. And so studying in Moscow and then hearing about it and then moving to Cambodia and then Rwanda. And that was just a moment that mattered. It really did change the direction of my profession and vocation. So if the moment with my parents, learning about Jesus, that changed me from a spiritual standpoint, from a career standpoint. It was hearing about microfinance. And then when I was in graduate school, did a project on Hope International. I was in the Democratic Republic of Congo and had time with the president. And he told me about that he was going to transition, and he essentially invited me to join Hope International, and that was 21 years ago. And that's also a moment that matters, bringing me to this amazing organization, this amazing team, and continues to be a great joy to serve with the Hope International team and board, and trying to do Christ-centered economic development in places of extreme poverty around the world. So that's who we are. That's what we do, and those are three moments that matter when I think about my life.
So we hear lots about pastors' kids, and we can understand that legacy. But you mentioned that your mother was involved as a public school teacher. What what did she model, or how did living kind of following Jesus affect her teaching?
Yeah, and Don, I think the gift that I was given was two things, both from my mom and my dad. But one was showing that following Jesus impacts everything. It impacts the way you see people. It impacts the way that you view your work. It views the way that you live with open-handedness. And one of my mom's incredible gifts was hospitality. And I don't know, it would be fun if there was some way to track, but our home was always open. And whether that was short term or long term, whether it was someone who just showed up on a Sunday morning at church, there was always room for one more at the table. And so we had other kids that left us when their parents were lived with us when their parents were missionaries, and we had exchange students with us from different places, and just live with this because of the reality of faith. There was an open door policy. There was always room for one more, and I just loved watching the way that my mom lived and modeled that to us all. Just yesterday, she came over. She lives in Lancaster with my parents live in Lancaster now. And she showed up with this kind of dessert that she had made. And it's so funny because that dessert I associate with a Sunday afternoon with our home open with someone, we don't know who, but there's always going to be enough for someone else. And it's just this one kind of dish that she made, this one dessert reminded me of this policy of there's always room for one more. And so we enjoyed it. But then I also brought it here to Hope International. And I just love that being part of my mom's legacy of hands and heart open for others to love and serve with a dessert or a kind word or a seat at the table. That's how she lived.
So that's, that generations, and certainly I benefited from my parents and particularly my grandparents' model of hospitality. But how does hospitality different for you? How do you appropriate that? What's that look like in your daily or weekly life?
Hmm. And one of the pieces that I would say is even upstream from hospitality is I think that God has uniquely wired you and Scott and Greg and myself and everyone else on this call differently. There are different areas, and it can feel ill-fitting when we try to take on the practices of someone else that maybe are not in alignment with the way that God has wired us. And so I think it's wonderful to kind of do this inventory of what are those things that I just light up? It's not even work. It is just a joy. And then how can I use that in building up of others, in sharing Christ's love, in inviting people in? And what does that look like to use the unique ways that you are wired and to use it in service to others? And I just think of my last trip. I mean, it was great because I got to stay with Scott and Jenny. I mean, you guys have the gift of hospitality. That was epic. And I mean, that's a good cup of coffee in the morning. By the way, that's not a beginner. That is an expert level. And I just love that's a gift that they have and they're using it. So I just think full freedom in the understanding. So what's that look like for us in this season? For us, we got really involved in foster care, and that has come at a we don't have that same ability to just see people and invite them over because we're trying to navigate a lot of home dynamics right now. So it looks different in this season, but still with that same heart and try to figure out what can we do that's in alignment with the gifts that God has given us. And I love the beautiful creativity. And again, Don, you know this, and Scott, you had the opportunity to see, but that really is at the heart of who Hope is as well. Around the world, people living in poverty, They're not waiting for handouts. They have gifts and abilities. And it begins not with an investment of capital. It begins with a question. What do you have? What are the assets that you have? And how can you use those in a way that is providing for your family and a blessing to your community? So I just love that question. What do you have in your hands, and how can you use that in loving God and loving others?
Peter, that's so powerful. In my decades long knowledge of you and seeing you first at the Trinity Forum Academy, and the community loved you there. And I was wondering, why did they love Peter Greer so much, coming in and participating? Well, you embody hospitality. That's such a wonderful, powerful story of welcoming. And I was just thinking today, I was at another meeting today, when Jesus said, "Go into all the world," he simultaneously had his disciples said, "Andrew, come and see." And he went into people's homes who may or may not have been hospitable, but he always welcomed people into his midst. And that's the secret now, embodied in Jesus at that Last Supper, where he welcomed his disciples, including a traitor, into his table. And I think that's what hope offers to the world, is really the Lord's table. And the communities, the small communities, we'll get into a little bit of what you do, but you've always participated and embodied that. And thank God for your mom and dad who had that noisy, boisterous home. And we were trying to create that as what we try to encourage guys to do, is be courageous. No matter, you don't need a lot. You just need love of Jesus, knowing that you've been welcomed in his family. Go and do likewise.
And I've
So
got
well
to,
said.
how does a kid from Massachusetts study in Russia? I mean, I'm thinking I'm really, I went to Purdue, West Lafayette. I studied in like Lexington or Greenwood, like I'm really stepping out. And like, how does that happen? What was the occasion? Was that an easy thing for you just to say, sure, I'm going to travel not only overseas, but in a communist country?
Yeah. You know, and just real quick, Greg, I so resonate with what you said. And all the stats point to a rise of loneliness, a rise of disconnection of relationships. And I think that in this moment of time, hospitality and friendship could just be the open doors for the gospel, could just be the most important postures to have in this particular moment of time. So I love the ways that you're living and equipping and investing and training others. So cheering for you as you have that important gathering this week. That's awesome. And Don, yeah, for better or for worse, one of my greatest assets is a willingness to say yes to whatever the invitation is. And so I think that was it. I don't know that it was great strategy. It was just an opportunity that came up to study. And why not take a semester traveling around? Why not? And I remember I was in Red Square when Boris Yeltsin was having a campaign event. Talk about being there at a key moment in history, and you could see it start to unfold. But then even beyond that, when I had the opportunity to get involved in microfinance, I heard about it. It's so hard for me to get a door. And I remember just checking off all of the "are you willing to" questions when I was applying for a job at World Relief. And it was, are you willing to work in a war zone? Are you willing to work in a place without running water? Are you willing to work in? And my answer was yes for all of them. And I know that is what opened up doors for me to go to rural Cambodia initially, but then also Rwanda, and then spend time in Zimbabwe. And so I just think that willingness to say yes has been my secret weapon. So I don't know. It was not strategic. It just was recognizing the world is changing. I want to learn about this amazing world that we live in. And the willingness to say yes has opened up some incredibly wonderful doors.
So you're speaking to a guy that on your survey, are you willing to work in a war zone? No. Are you willing to, not have ready? No. How do you take a guy like me who kind of likes comfort and even checking half the boxes? How do you get from my place to your place? Um,
Yeah. Well, I would say, Don, again, I'm not going to check your boxes, and I'm not even going to tell you which boxes to check, other than one box, which is, are you willing to follow Jesus wherever he leads you? And that very possibly could not be. And for most of us, it's not going to be to Rwanda because there's an amazing team and the global church is at work. And in most places of the world, it's going to be people in that country serving people in that country. That's just the way that it's going to work. And so I don't think there's any expectation, but I do think there's a posture. And the posture is, my will be done or your will be done. The posture is, I'm going to have my hands closed, or I'm going to say, Lord, lead me and help me to follow you and courageously respond. And I don't think that there is one path that means you go down. I don't think that means that we're going to change. We're going to check the same boxes. And Don, I know you well enough to know that there is that willingness to say, where does God have me? What are the ways that I'm gifted? What are the ways that I'm wired? And if God has given you the ability to grow some amazing companies, to care deeply and uncommonly for employees, do it with all your heart. And if God has equipped you with resources, use them to bless the nations and advance the global mission of the church. So I don't think there is a set response as much to one posture, which is, where you lead, I will go. When you tell me to, I will follow. I think that's the only question. And then that impacts all the others differently for all of us.
I find that, and I'll just one comment to that I have a hard time praying that with such an open hand, and it's normally, Lord, give me courage to even partially say yes. Give me courage to, this is what I've got. Help thou my unbelief, right? And that frees me from thinking, hey, I got to be the superstar. Hey, I'm willing to go. I'm not really willing to go, but help my unwillingness. Break me, soften me where I should be, and give me courage and discernment as to what that means in this stage of life, this season, right? Scott or Greg?
I was going to pull on this thread a little, and I know you have something to say, but I just want to ask you a question and tie it all together.
Sure.
How has Peter's yes impacted you? What have you seen and observed there? And in particular, what vision has his yes and your own calling in the Lord impacted what you and Jenny are about right here and now in our city and around the world?
Yeah. I think, so my original, answer this maybe a little indirectly, my original connection to hope was really born out of my experience of doing our business's mission work with Packmore in East Africa primarily. And
which is Bill Moore.
Yep. Many people know Bill, and several know Bill, and even going back, you had made a comment earlier, Don, about just relationship and doing things alone. And Bill went to Africa on his own the first time when he had this vision, and he came back and he said, "I'm never going alone again." And that's when he called me and he said, "Hey, would you leave financial planning to come do this?" And I'm like, "I don't know, maybe." God's inviting us. Sorry, like you guys are talking about this. I've been really working over this thought of like, God is inviting us into a story, and we so much want to put the onus on us. Like, I have to do it. God's called me to do something and I have to do it. And that's not it, right? 1 Thessalonians 5:24, he who called you is faithful and he will surely do it. It's not up to Don and Greg and Peter and Scott. Yes, we have to be faithful and have the courage, Don. But God's the one who's going to do it when he invites us into these stories, right? And he's just inviting us into these things. One of my favorite Bible lessons, like, as you guys were talking, Peter and John on the beach, right? When Jesus restores Peter and he's walking down the beach and he's telling Peter, basically, you're going to be crucified for me. And John's behind him and Peter turns around and he's like, well, what about him? And Jesus is like, what I have for him doesn't matter. You be faithful to what I called you to, right?
Yeah.
And so I love what Peter was saying too, like, Don, go build businesses, man, and do that really well. And if God calls you to go on a mission trip, great, go.
Yeah.
But I don't know, he's got different stories for all of us, The hardest thing that I wrestle with is that comparison of, I want to be more like Don Palmer. I want to be more like Greg Enos sometimes, And it's like,
I say, please don't.
Yeah. You guys are fantastic, but we do that, right? We compare. Anyhow, but that hope, what Peter does and what hope does is just to take the gospel. And that was one of the things about going to Rwanda, to see how the people of Rwanda, Jenny and I have supported Hope because I love the work in East Africa and just the business. I love the hand up, not the hand out that Hope is about, the microfinance and the multiplication of that. I'm just a huge believer in that. I've seen it. I believe it. And so that was kind of the draw to Hope. But to go to Rwanda and to see the staff of Hope in Rwanda impact the lives of the people in Rwanda, that's where the magic was, right? Like, we're writing a check over here, and giving it to Hope because we believe it, but it's the people on the ground. It's relationship. We were talking about this earlier. It's a thread throughout the conversation that it is relationship that changes lives. We need the money to do that, but it's the relationship that changes the lives. And so that's what being a part of Hope for me is, just being able to be a part of that relationship. And Peter's so good at relationship, like we said. And then the community here in Indy, we're part of this relationship. Anyhow, I don't know if I'm making sense, but it gets me going.
That's beautiful.
So, Peter, tell us about this trip to Rwanda. Just walk us through what's the agenda, and maybe I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't quite understand the scope of what Hope does, in addition to strictly loaning money and having people pay it back.
Yeah, and open invitation. Come on, come and see. We love going and
We're
seeing.
going,
And
Scott.
at this point, Hope International, we serve in 30 different nations and are just about to give our $2 billionth of investment into the families that we serve. And we have about 1,500 full-time employees and just past 3.8 million families that we've been able to serve. So it's really, I think of it as an opportunity to not go and, a lot of trips, it's what can we do during our week in a different country? And we might sometimes have an overinflated view of how much we can accomplish in a week. And this is very different. It's just to go see, celebrate, and encourage what God is doing through partners, through staff, and the opportunity to meet some of the entrepreneurs that we serve, some of the church partners, and hear the stories and encourage the staff that are doing it every single day. And I might overinflate the importance of kind of what can happen on a week, but I think we underinflate the importance of just what can happen in communities where people show up again and again, invest and plant small seeds and watch what God makes grow in the years to come. And so it's really a vision trip. It's an opportunity to see. And Scott, maybe you could share a little bit of what stands out. I think this is the best part of my job, that it's almost like a bridge. It's an opportunity to be a bridge from friends that have been generously supporting and then spending time with the families that we serve. 3 weeks ago, I was in Peru and Paraguay, and going to Zambia and Zimbabwe in June, and just love the opportunity to keep showing up and trying to encourage and connect friends with the work that's happening around the world. But yeah, Scott, what stands out from that trip to Rwanda that we had together?
Yeah, so much. Thanks, Peter. One story is coming to mind again, and I touched on it earlier about just seeing the staff, the relationship that the people of Hope have with the people of Rwanda, right? Because that's where, if you guys could probably talk about this for hours, of the people that have impacted your lives, but it's those relationships. And so, one story that stood out is we went to visit a man. We went to see a store in a part of Kigali. And he had actually started with Hope, I think around 10 years ago. He literally had a business in a box. Every day he was just trying to sell a couple things, buy a couple things, and make a little money. And his business was in a box. And his first loan from Hope was $20. Today, 10 years later, he has a storefront. His last loan, he has 2 homes, he has a car, and his last loan from Hope International was $20,000. And he invited us to his home, of course, which is just so the hospitality of, for those of us who have been blessed to be able to travel internationally and especially for me, East Africa, but just the hospitality of people. So he invited us to his home, and he was talking about the way he talked about the staff at Hope. You would have thought he was talking about a family member, just how much they meant to him, how much they walked him through. They not only supported him financially, but they were there to help give business advice. They prayed for him and his family. They were like a family. And so to hear that story And we heard that over and over again, and to see what Hope is doing to build community through savings groups. I think that was the other thing that was really impactful. To see these savings groups, we went to one group. They were mostly elderly. I think they were all in their 60s or 70s, and their savings group, they were literally.
Well, tell them what a savings.
Yeah. Thanks, Don. So a savings group is a group of, and Peter, you can correct me, but maybe 10 to 15, 20 people. They come together from the community and they, in essence, form their own bank. And so they pool money together, and then they will lend money out to each other. And they charge interest. So it's a way for them to put some money into a bank, just like a bank would, earn some interest on that by lending it out to each other.
Okay.
And so those savings groups, each savings group is unique. They have their own amounts of money that they can save. But at this savings group that we visited, the amount of money that an individual was able to put into the bank, in essence, on a deposit per meeting was the equivalent to basically our 30 cents at 30 cents. And so that's what they were able to save. And not everybody could save that much, but that was that was the cap that they were able to put into it. But to see how they cared for each other and encouraged each other. And then one guy was struggling, especially. And so there were like 5 people in the group that these people have nothing in our eyes. And 5 people, one person brought a bag of bananas, somebody brought some cassavas, and they're bringing it's truly the widow's mite. They're bringing out of the nothing that they have to bless this other guy who's part of the group, because he was really going through a hard time.
Yeah.
And you see that stuff, it just shakes you. It rattles you.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I think Chris had a question.
Yeah, we have a couple questions. So if you join us on Zoom every Monday, the last Monday of the month at noon, you can ask a question live here on Zoom and watch it. Just join our email list at citizen7indy.com. That's the number 7. And you can join us or catch this later live on YouTube and Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So Richard asks, what and where do you see great risk, reward, adventures in our changing world today? Peter or Scott?
Peter,
Yeah.
I'll let you go. I feel like you might have
Sure.
a better view of that.
Yeah. So I think when I look at just the last few years in particular, that has been this tendency in the midst of volatility and uncertainty to say, let's take a step back, let's figure out what's happening, and then let's get engaged. And that is completely understandable. And in many ways, that is a wise approach when it comes to the businesses that we run. And yet, I think that if we do that approach, we miss out on the greatest moment, which is when there is volatility and uncertainty. Individuals are open in a way that they might not be when everything is just comfortable. And when I think about what is happening over the last few years in Ukraine, as an example, the last 4 years has been so much challenge and pain for Ukrainians. And we've been able to help certain entrepreneurs that were fleeing the violence in the East and to reset up, to restart their business, to provide for their families. And in many ways, if we were just kind of a commercial entity trying to maximize return, you would say this is a terrible time to have more investment in a country that is facing so many challenges right now. And we think that's exactly why we exist. We can take those risks, and it's just amazing to what happens, to see the doors that open, to see the relationships that deepen and develop, to see the opportunities that arise. And so I would say if we are looking for those places of great impact, and I love that risk return, I think that in many ways, especially for me, trying to say, how do we follow Jesus? The open doors, the open possibilities that happen in the midst, not in the wake of, but in the midst of challenge, uncertainty, volatility. Those are the moments that we're seeing so many incredible opportunities. So I would just say, find disruption, find challenge, find where things feel like it's fallen apart. Find pain and suffering, and don't be afraid to step into those places. That is where there's a different level of conversation. There is a different level of focus. There is a different level of urgency. There's a different level of response. And you just know, you remember who shows up when you're going through it. So in general, maybe this is too vague, but I would say look for the pain, look for the challenge, look for the volatility, look for the uncertainty. Those are moments that I think you can have an outsized impact simply by showing up.
Maybe I agree 100%, Peter. And I think maybe just as you were talking, another thought came to mind, and we touched on this, Don. You mentioned it earlier. What's the greatest risk? I think the greatest risk for me, and maybe some others can relate to this, the greatest risk for me is comfort, because comfort keeps me from wanting to do those risks that you're talking about, Peter, right? Like for many of us, and I don't know everybody's situation, so I want to be careful, but like I'm so blessed. And and again, I can compare myself to the person who has more blessings, but at the end of the day, I'm so blessed, and that can just keep me comfortable. And and that's where I miss the opportunities that God has put in front of me. That's where going out of your comfort zone to go to Rwanda, to go on a mission trip, or whatever it is, or to for you, entrepreneurs who have to step out of their comfort zone to try to create a business, and you don't know what's going to happen. But like, if that's how God wired you, then go. But I think it's our comfort. I think in some ways, um, in a lot of ways, maybe, right? Like God has blessed us so much, but give me grace on the spiritualization here. Maybe the devil's allowed us to be so blessed because he knows when we're so blessed, we become useless at times, for me.
Wow.
I was kind of convicted by when you said somebody was hurting and 4 or 5 people came along and did all these things. And I remember as an entrepreneur, I felt more alone when things were really hard. And I'm sure I missed the opportunity to just come alongside. And I guess the question might be, it might not be person owning their business, but in their career, how do we emulate what they did over there in a 20th, first century kind of a way? Any thoughts on how we can be more useful, available, maybe less busy to be present?
Yeah. A couple things come to mind, Don, and I think um, I get stuck in that thought of I have to fix it.
Right.
When I know somebody's who's hurting or in need or not,
Yeah.
whatever, is I have to fix it. I have to have the magic answer. I have to say the right thing. Man, confession. Even today, like I want to say something good, and it's like I don't know. But when somebody's hurting, what do they need? They need people. They just need somebody to come to them. And so I think the first thing we do when we know somebody's hurting is just go. Just maybe it's just sitting there. Maybe it's sitting on a couch like you and Greg having a cup of coffee, right? Like I just want to know I'm not alone, because you said it, right? You feel isolated, and then we feel alone. But we have to have our awareness. We have to have our eyes open, and maybe all of that. You mentioned Peter's book on prayer earlier. Like it starts with praying, God, change my heart.
Yeah.
You got to change my heart first. Help me to have that heart of compassion.
Peter, thoughts on that, and do we have any other questions?
No, I love that. I would just say I thought the same thing, Scott. Presence, prayer, and then specific generosity. Those 3 things. When I think about the most challenging times that we went through as a family, and I'll never forget, just the first day we're going through it. It was a really complex situation with foster care, and our friend showed up with a tater tot casserole and hugs, and not a lot of words, not a lot of this is what it means in the grand scheme, just like with us in the middle of it. And I always think of a tater tot casserole and a hug as exactly what we needed in that moment. And so my guess is we all can think about those moments when we know someone showed up, and maybe we need to remember those. We need to tell those stories, because then we're on the lookout. Who is hurting today? And unfortunately, when people are hurting, I don't want to say the wrong thing. We come up with all of these reasons, and maybe it's just a little bit of food and a hug, and that's it. But I think that's pretty powerful. Just one thing that I saw was 3 weeks ago when I was in Peru. I was in a rural part of Peru, and this community was incredibly poor from a financial standpoint. And not many people understand, but the price of oil right now is really having a disproportionate impact on people in poverty because everything is getting more expensive. And when you live with very little margin, food prices go up, like all of those key things, and it just becomes much more expensive. And the people that can least bear the change are those that oftentimes have a disproportionate weight. So anyway, within this community, food insecurity was real. Like there just is not enough food. And they started showing up every day at noon. Everyone brought the little bit that they had and they made a community meal and everyone kind of brought something. And it was almost like a, modern day jambalaya or a modern day Book of Acts chapter 2, where they showed up and they gave what they had from their fields or from their trading. And it was one meal that they enjoyed together. And it just was this beautiful picture of, more uncertainty, more challenge, but more opportunities just to show up in love. And it was pretty powerful. So I got to enjoy a meal with a special group of people that in the midst of huge challenges were coming together in a beautiful picture of what I think we all need. Maybe it's not food insecurity, but we all have those moments. And what if we could be people who see and don't turn away, but see and show up with hearts and hands that are wide open?
Well, Peter, we certainly need that recipe for tater tot casserole.
Yeah.
We can start there. So please send it our way. Chris, I think we have a couple other questions.
Yeah, we got a couple more questions from Dan and Adam. Let's start with Dan. Peter is, I would say, a prolific author, including one of my favorite books of the last couple of years, Lead with Prayer. You can find all of his books on Amazon, The Danger of Doing Good, Rooting for Rivals. One of them is Mission Drift, and that is the subject of Dan's question. Thank you to Peter for Mission Drift. Any thoughts on the relevance of the book today? If you could first tell us a little bit about the book and then answer the question of relevance of the book today, please.
Yeah, so Mission Drift, hard to believe, but that was a decade ago that we wrote that book with Chris Horst and Anna Haggard, and really was just looking around and seeing how many Christ-centered organizations within a short amount of time were going off and still doing the humanitarian work, but moving away from Christ, moving away from their spiritual grounding and full mission. And the question was, how does this happen? And how can we make sure it doesn't happen to Hope International? And as we started doing the research, we just tried to figure out what does it take and to really look at this counterfactual. Similar organizations that had similar founding stories, and yet over time you see the deviation, some remaining mission true, just as committed today to the full mission to Christ as they were in their founding, and others that slowly moved away and asking the question, how does this happen? And over the last 10 years, it has been heartbreaking that we've received a number of different messages and emails and heartbreaking stories of saying, I read your book, and I've got another example for you. And it just like broke our hearts how many other stories there are. And I think the same thing is true. We've got to pay attention to small compromises. We've got to pay attention to full integration of the mission that we have. And in many ways, over the last 10 years, there's been other pieces that I think we missed in the book. And I would say Lead with Prayer, we did a book on it because I think we missed it in Mission Drift. But we can't stay on mission if we do not have a culture of prayer. We need that desperately. And so that's been one piece of exploration. How can we incorporate prayer and listening to the Lord into everything that we do as an organization so that we do not drift? But more recently, I think the other piece that we've noticed over the last 10 years is it's not just organizations that drift, but upstream from every organization that drifts are people who drift. And I think that we missed that in the original book. And so we wrote a book that's almost like Mission Drift for our hearts. And it's called How Leaders Lose Their Way. And it's really trying to say, how can we make sure that in our hearts, we're not drifting, we're not slowly losing our way? And how can we make sure that we're protecting what matters most? So maybe those would be the two things. So decade later, I would say drift is every bit still as real. But in addition to what we wrote about, I think prayer and paying attention to personal drift in our lives are the pieces that I would probably emphasize even more that I think we missed in that original book.
Peter, has there been a particular temptation for you as the leader of Hope and for Hope in general that has really been hard to push back against, that would have caused this drift that you're speaking to?
I mean, now we're getting personal here. You're just meddling. And for better or for worse, I don't write books out of expertise. I write it out of an understanding of my own vulnerability and my own weakness and my own questions and curiosity. And so, yeah, we're just talking about those things. I find it, we have staff prayer every day, and almost every day, today included, it was at 11 o'clock Eastern, and I've got so much on my calendar. And and I was like, oh, should I go? And I know the answer, but it's like a daily decision. It's like a daily. So that's one that I keep struggling with is, will I prioritize prayer? Will I make sure that I am grounded in the word before I touch my phone? Will I today make sure that I have the habits and practices that I know are important, and yet I still struggle to make them happen? So that's maybe one issue. I think the other one that I've been thinking about just personally is the tendency for drift, personally and professionally. I think that we can expand to new opportunities that might be good, but we might be expanded beyond our areas of competency, and we might get very mediocre at a lot of things. And so I think the regular question is not just, is it good or is it important, but is this also the right thing for me to spend time on? Is this also the right thing for us as an organization to spend time on? And we've got invitations to go into all kinds of new countries. And my default is, yes, there's need, let's go. But how can we make sure we're doing it with health, with excellence, and ultimately with a core commitment to the mission that we believe God has given us as an organization? So the tendency to be shallow, the tendency to expand beyond our competencies, the tendency to be stretched thin in our life and daily habits and practices, I feel all of those today. I'm not even talking about yesterday. Those are all the ones today that I feel a real challenge. But again, maybe the gift of the writing projects is I am regularly reminded that I know how easy it is to drift. And so, Lord, help us to stay on mission personally and professionally. Lord, help us to stay on mission to what you have invited us to be a part of. And the regular reminders of just how easy it is to drift and just how much we need God's grace today and tomorrow to live and serve on mission.
Thank you.
So let's take on our next question from Adam. This is both to Peter and Scott. Both of you have been on a journey learning sustainability in ministry and the value of Sabbath life. How do you now balance the values of drive and execution with Sabbath, sustainability, and restorative rest? Let's start with Scott.
Yeah.
Easy questions.
Easy questions, right? Yeah, people who've maybe heard this is something I wrestle with, honestly, and I see the value of it, Sabbath, and yet I struggle. There's a phrase I heard a while back that stuck with me, and it's strive satisfied. Strive satisfied. And that resonated with me, right? Because I think many of us are wired with that. Yeah, we do want to strive, and there's something like we want to, we feel like the Lord has given us an opportunity to do things. Sometimes it can be in our flesh, but I think for a lot of us, I honestly believe a lot of us have a desire to strive because we want to bless, like we want to do good things for the Lord. And I always need to look at my heart. Our heart is deceitful above all things. So I need to check my heart. Where's that striving? Is it for me or is it for the Lord? But I want to strive, but in that I need to be satisfied too. And I need to be content. And so, the Sabbath thing is something that I'm working on. My wife would tell you that I'm not great at it, but I see the value of it. And I want to grow in that area because I think the Lord has called us to that and he wants us to rest. And I think when we work, but we have to work for 6 days too. That's the other thing. I think sometimes maybe we don't do as much in the 6 days so that we can rest on the 7th. And so work for 6 days and then be able to rest on the 7th. So yeah, just some initial thoughts, but certainly something I'm wrestling with as well.
I say we have lousy Sabbaths because we have lousy work often.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand.
They do, don't they? You're exactly right, Greg. Good way to put it.
Peter?
Yeah, and I think my interpretation of the question was also that idea of sustainability and what does that actually mean and personal. And I love what you said about just the personal application, Scott. But I think there's also this question about sustainability for our teams. And I think that in the pursuit of noble causes and missions and great businesses, we sometimes can trample over people. And I think that when I read scripture, it talks not just about the work that we do and the result, but it talks about the way that we pursue it. And I think for us, the question is, as we go about these noble causes, and this includes churches and nonprofits that not always are known for the way that we treat employees. I think that matters to God. And so, one real simple way that we do is we want to track people in the red. How many people are operating in an unsustainable way? How many people are giving so much that their family actually resents the organization? How many people are doing this amazing work, pouring themselves out, but it's workaholism that is somehow celebrated in a cause of noble Christian service? And so we want to pay attention to that. So how the team is doing matters deeply to me. And so we have a performance monitoring software. I was just looking at this last week, but that looks at weekly. How are we doing? And how many people on this kind of Likert scale, 1 to 5? How many ones and twos do we have right now? All things considered, how are we doing in life and work? Like just a real vague question, but it's like, hey, how are you doing? And it allows us to spot difficult times and departments. We look at the average department by department, and we can really track how we're doing. And then we do Best Christian Workplace. And then we have a separate one about spiritual integration and staff engagement survey. And so I think step number one is to actually have a sober assessment personally and organizationally. And if we want to have sustainable work, we've got to have sustainability in the way that we engage as a team. And one of the best things that we did recently was we encouraged staff to go on a digital fast. That is good for our soul right now. And to give permission to say, hey, over this period of time, we're going to try to be completely screen free, and it's optional, but for us, we're gonna model it. We're gonna try it, and the feedback was just so incredibly positive that it allowed our hearts to get out of the danger zone. It allowed us to slow down, and as you were saying, Scott, I think that actually, ironically, improves productivity the other days of the week in the way that we're wired. And then the last thing is that if someone sends an email on Sunday, just our organizational culture is in love. We say, hey, thanks so much. I got your email, but we don't respond on a Sunday. And just a simple way of shaping the culture of hope, which is Sabbath. We want to practice together. And I know what happens. If I start sending emails on Sunday, that sends a very clear message to the organization. And we want to send a very different message, which is, hey, we know you work really hard. This is a day that is different. And it is not a badge when you're working at, Sunday afternoon. No. That's a day that we want you to be plugged in with the people and relationships that matter most. So I do think listening to the global team, identifying areas of struggle, responding appropriately, and then also setting an organizational culture that sees and celebrates at least 1 out of 7 to be a day that is different in the work that we do.
So maybe we're about at our time, but hope does a lot of work through the church, which makes it a little different in terms of some other microfinance or NGOs. But what have both of you learned? We've got mega churches, we've got people who consume, they see themselves more as a consumer of worship than perhaps what have you learned about the church from your overseas experience that we could apply to better be the church here in Indiana?
I've got to hop off in just a minute here. I know our time is just at the end, but just real quickly, I get so inspired by reading the book of Acts for so many reasons, but I see it happening in today. And what was a model of what changed the world, turned the world upside down, I just have to believe those same principles are at work right now. And the same thing. And what is it? those small gatherings matter. And whether a savings group or microfinance institution in and through the local church in the places that we serve, or if it's that same principle in our own communities, it works. Those relationships matter. And I think we got to go back to shared meals and circles instead of rows. I think that matters a whole lot. And then the second piece that we saw is, and they shared, they lived generously in the way that they went about their work. They were like, what can we do to show up together? And there is a highly individual interpretation of the way that we live out our faith for some of us. And I think we've got a lot to learn from the global church right now. And so I just long for those things that I have seen around the world in energized church on the front lines of loving and serving. I want them to model for us. And if you haven't read a new book by Jeff Galley and Phil Smith called The Way Back to One Another, it's essentially learning some of these lessons of what it looks like, taking some of the principles around the world and then applying them to the places that we serve here as well. So anyway, super grateful for the way that we're seeing that lived out and long for even more of that today.
I think that probably says it all. Thank you both for being what we've just been blessed, learning more about you and learning more about getting outside our comfort zone and trying to make Jesus smile every day.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, any final comment?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for listening to Big Hearted Indy here. You can check out all of the upcoming events like Restored Family, which is an April-May cohort that's coming up. May 13th, Coffee and Connection about mentoring. There's a lot of stuff happening at citizen7indy.com. And you can find out more by signing up for the email, Don.
All right. Greg, any final?
No, just thank you. I hope to see Peter next in May out in Napa at the Praxis Summit. I don't know if you're coming or not, but I always love getting a big hug from Peter out there. And Scott, thank you so much. Looking forward to our relationship growing as we seek to love each other in the name of Jesus and see this city become the joy capital of the world.
Amen.
And welcome back, Peter. Anytime, the red carpet's out for you. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you guys for what you guys are doing. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Greg.
And thank you for watching the show today. You can find all of the podcasts at YouTube by searching Citizen 7. And you can also catch up on some events. Some of the events are recorded and placed on YouTube, like Chris Henry's recent conversation on AI. You'll be able to see that on YouTube and in the podcast feed. So, and if you enjoy those, please share those with your friends. Say, hey, check out this group. Come join me at a Coffee and Connection. All of these events are recorded. These podcasts exist just to help spread the word and to help speed up your invite to somebody else by joining an in-person event. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you. Thanks, and check us out at citizen7indy.com.